I mentioned some headlines, and I think this week was kind of a good summary of Mike Craven's article, which you could go check out right now on TexasFootball.com. It is called Longhorns, Aggies Gear Up on Opposite Sides with the Rivalry Looming in the Foreground, which, of course, alludes to their eventual move to the SEC, Texas. Anyway, some news this week dropped that A&M picked up Denton Ryan linebacker Anthony Hill, 5-star, another coup for the Aggies, continuing their success from the 2022 class, 2023. And then Texas misses out on Colton Vasek from Westlake, a 4-star defensive end from, as I mentioned, from Westlake. He committed to Oklahoma, which continues kind of their slew of missing out on homegrown Austin products and defensive products in general. So, Craven, those two news drops this week. What's your takeaway? And kind of give us a hint of what you talk about in the article.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the Anthony Hill front, that's huge for Texas A&M.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, he's the best linebacker I've seen in the state over the last 10, 12 years, at least over the last 2 decades going. I've been trying to think of, like, the last linebacker I can think of who was as dominant as him in high school. And the only person I could really think of was, like, Baron Browning. But then back to, like, Steve Edmond. How he dominated at smaller classifications. Anthony Hill's doing this at the highest level of high school football in the country, right? 6A football in the state of Texas. So a really good prospect, a really good get for Texas A&M, and one that hurts Texas. It was Texas and Texas A&M, right? We're back to kind of seeing those two-way battles on the recruiting front. They're going to have more and more emphasis on them as they're both in the same conference. They both start playing each other again. I think it's a bad sign for Pete Kwiatkowski. If we're going to look at this from the Texas side, right? You see this team that's recruiting juggernauts everywhere. Arch Manning, Quinn Ewers comes back, right? They get Jonte Cook. Like, they have all the momentum in the world, but not defensively. You know, they did it. I thought their 2022 class was really good at the defensive line, right? But if you're trying to build this class, right, you're trying to get to what A&M was last year, at like the top class in the nation, you have to land a guy like Anthony Hill. I think it's an indictment on the Texas defense over the last few years, and that's probably unfair to blame Kwiatkowski for all of it because he's only been there for a year.
Sure.
But I think the way that the Texas offensive line has a reputation, the Texas defense has a reputation, and it hasn't been good for a long time. So if you're a main star middle linebacker or you're a defensive end at Westlake, even though that's right down the road, why wouldn't you go play for Brent Venerables at Oklahoma? Why wouldn't you go play for a Texas A&M team that signed 6 5-star defenders over the last 2 cycles, right? Like, you want to go play with the best, and you want to go play for the best. Right now, if we're talking about Texas's defense, that's not true. Neither one of those is true, right? And if you have those other options, you're going to take them, and that's bad news for Texas. That's something that they're going to have to fix, and I think the only way to do it is to play better on the field. Right, these guys. If Texas goes out and plays really well defensively, you know, maybe Colton's back in the mix. Right, maybe you call up Anthony Hill again, and if those guys are gone, it helps you in the next cycle, and the next cycle, and the next cycle. Because I know this, Texas is going to score points, and the offensive players that they're recruiting, with Steve Sarkisian leading the way, Texas offense is going to be fine. But you cannot go to the SEC and be this bad of a defense. Right? They've been bad in the Big 12. They're getting bullied in the Big 12. What is going to happen when it's Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Ole Miss, A&M? And so they're going to have to get the defensive recruiting to match the offensive recruiting before I'm, sitting here and going, I think Texas is back.
I think you mentioned Pete Kwiatkowski, and I am curious about his recruiting acumen at Washington because I'm not familiar with it, right? I know that Washington produced good defenses under him. So as a coach, I'm very much confident in what he's able to do, but I'm not familiar if they were able to snag a couple of guys from Oregon in recruiting battles and things like that. I don't know. Maybe somebody more familiar with that side of his resume can enlighten me on that. But also, the ones that I'm kind of looking at are Terry Joseph, Blake Gideon, Jeff Choate, right? Like, those are the guys that I'm wondering, like, okay, why does nobody want to play for those guys, right? Like, is there something else to their recruiting, right? Do they not have? Are those guys not recruiting efficiently enough, right? Terry Joseph comes from Notre Dame, who never recruited poorly, but probably didn't reach certain heights that they should have as a recruiter, as we're seeing now that they are under Marcus Freeman. Is that something that kind of hinders him as maybe as a program builder, as a position coach? I don't know, because I believe he's a secondaries coach, Terry Joseph, I believe. Yeah,
corners.
And then Blake Gideon, of course, coaches safeties. So I don't know. I think Bo Davis obviously flashes his acumen as a recruiter, as you mentioned, with the defensive line.
Line's been fun.
Defensive line's been good, and his resume speaks for itself as a recruiter and coach. So, like, I think that's fine. But
You miss out on O'Shawn Mathis.
That's the thing too. You bring in
Right.
Gary Patterson, and I don't know how much he's involved in recruiting, so I don't want to blame that. But like, yeah, you have O'Shawn Mathis there on a table for you.
You lose out to Nebraska.
You lose that to Nebraska. You lose out on Drew Sanders, right? Another Texas player who goes out of state.
There's just no excuses for it. You can't
you
keep
should be able
missing
to
out.
snag some guys here and there,
Right.
especially when you're having such good success on the offensive end.
And I think another point is this shows how NIL doesn't play this huge factor. I think we all give it credit to, right? Like
money's not an issue here.
Right, because like for these 5-star guys, they're not making a 1-year decision. This isn't like where can I go get $20,000 next year and $20,000 the year after that. This is who's going to set me up to be a multi-millionaire in 4 years, right? And if you're a defensive player, just for the same reason, if you're a wide receiver, you're picking Texas. On the other side, if you're a defensive player, and I have Oklahoma, A&M, and Texas, and when those are all in the SEC, that's going to be kind of the triangle, right? LSU, let's add LSU in there. If you have an offer from LSU, Texas, Oklahoma, and A&M, and you play middle linebacker, and your goal is to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft, you're going to A&M.
Yeah.
Or you're going to Oklahoma, or you're going to LSU until at Texas you see concrete evidence that you can go there, get developed, and get drafted.
Right.
That's why offensive linemen hadn't been going there, right? Then you get Kyle Flood, and Kyle Flood can go, well, I put in offensive lineman every single year at Alabama.
Or to
right?
your point,
so,
on
like
Oklahoma,
there's evidence.
Yeah, to your point on Oklahoma, right? Oklahoma hasn't had a good defense, but Brent Venables comes
right.
in.
Brent Venables
You want to play for Brent Venables,
right? And so Texas doesn't have that. Like Sark is the ultimate like he like the show me on offense, right?
Offensive
you have
guy,
Sark,
yes.
you know. But on defense,
have
do
that
you
guy.
have something equal to that? I would imagine behind the scenes, Steve Sarkisian is looking at these recruiting classes and going, we're getting whoever we want offensively. And we're not close to getting whoever we want defensively. How do we get there? What do we do for that? Unfortunately for him, I think it's going to be an on-the-field deal until it's a chicken and egg thing.
Yep.
And I think at this point, if you're a defensive recruit, you're waiting to see Texas show you that they can do it before you just assume that they're going to.
Right.
And if they continue to go like this, unfortunately, it looks like that. It's, at least for the immediate future of the SEC, they might be somebody like a Mississippi State, Ole Miss, where they're exciting, right? And they'll catch some teams sleeping, but they just cannot stop anybody on that other end. This fall will be an indication because obviously a lot of this roster is going to carry over to the SEC. And I don't want to say like if 2024 maybe, or they close well with 2023 or 2024 is a good class, those guys aren't going to have an immediate impact on the SEC. So it's going to be this roster more or less the one that they're going to be taking. And as it's constructed, it's not ready to compete in the SEC, at least defensively. So let's switch around to A&M for a little bit because they've had success here and kind of hint at the article that Craven wrote. It's basically comparing both sides of the ball for each program, right? Texas is having success with running back, at wide receiver, at offensive line. Texas A&M, obviously they're not having a bad time on offense, but defensively they're really cashing in, especially last season on what they were able to do on that side of the ball, despite losing Mike Elko, right? They lost their defensive coordinator, but I think the brand of A&M now is what it is, and so players like Ish Harris, Anthony Hill, Martrell Harris, Denver Harris, of course, there's another one, Dayon Bowie, like those guys are all just like, yeah, let's go. Like, let's all go back and make another generation of the wrecking crew, basically carrying over what they did last season. Yeah,
and last year you see that defensive line class that they signed and some of those big, Walter Nolan, Shamar Stewart, Labius Overton, right? And if you're playing middle linebacker, you're like, man, I get to play behind those guys, right? And it's like a quarterback looks at an offensive line, and middle linebacker looks at the defensive line because those guys protect you, right? If those guys are all taking up a couple blocks, Anthony Hill's saying, I can go there and get 115, 130 tackles, like right away, right? They're going to have to double team Walter Nolan. I'm going to be free. Texas doesn't have that yet. Now, they signed a tremendous 2022 class defensively, right? Especially on the defensive line. So maybe in a year or two, as those guys start to develop, linebackers across the state and across the country start to think that about the Texas, defensive line. But right now, I just don't think they do. And A&M, I think, has done an excellent job recruiting defense, making that priority, knowing the trenches are important. They already have one of the best secondaries in college football, maybe the best secondary in college football, definitely the best one in this state. If their front seven can match that, you're right. We're starting to talk about a real wrecking crew situation here, and that's how you win in the SEC. I look at A&M right now and think the 2023 season, they're going to be a top 5 program in this country, right? They're going to be an odds-on favorite to be one of those 4 teams in the college football playoff. It really is one of those positions where if they just figure out quarterback, that program feels kind of unstoppable right now. Like they are running the state in a way that we haven't seen A&M do that in a while. They're just missing that linchpiece pin.
Sure.
You know, they're just missing that linchpin at quarterback, and maybe it's on campus. You know, maybe
Sure.
that's Connor Wigman, maybe that's Haynes King, right?
Maybe it's need reps. You know,
right? And we just haven't seen it yet. But it is amazing to watch what Jimbo's doing, and you see why they gave him kind of a carte blanche, $10 million for the rest of your life contract, right? This is why you bring in a Jimbo Fisher, to put you in these conversations, to put you in position to go win at the highest level. I think A&M is geared up to do that now better than they have in my whole entire life, maybe since the 80s when I was a baby.
right? Basically, and this is going to gear up for the Lone Star Showdown to eventually be a clash of styles.
Man.
Like it's going to be very fascinating to watch this future defense versus this future Texas offense.
You're signing up for like Devin Campbell versus Walter Nolan,
Stewart,
right? And then you got, Jaden Blue running against Anthony Hill.
Right.
And then you got Jonte Cook going out against routes against Denver Harris.
I was about to say,
and you're just like those kind of matchups are lining up across the field, and you're like, everybody's excited about this game.
Sure.
But you start thinking about this offense versus defense, like, man, this is going to be like a show. It's going to be a real show.
So I got a quick question before we move on. Are they going to be stuck in the same division, Texas A&M and Texas?
They haven't announced that yet.
Okay, I didn't know.
Everything I read is they're thinking of like a 3-6 motto, right? Where it's more pods. Like you face these three teams every single year, and then we mix up. I think it's getting too big for divisions, and I also think conferences are looking at it and going, well, why is the best team in the conference having to play the sixth best team in the conference depending on the year? Every year, the second best team can be different. Let's have a resume builder as a conference championship. I think divisions are kind of archaic and outdated, and we kind of see the 3-6 model move, which I love. I think the 3-6 model is a genius idea.
It's very interesting. I mean, I thought divisions were kind of need to be scrapped a while ago, so that's a good solution.
Yeah, because it gives your fan base the consistency of rivalry, right? Texas will still have OU. Texas will, theory, still have A&M. Texas will probably have Arkansas, right? But then you also, every couple of years, you're going to get LSU, you're going to get Georgia, you're going to get Alabama, you're going to get Florida, right? And those are the games for Texas that they've been missing at home, right? Like A&M's schedule the last couple of years, you look at 3 or 4 games, you're like, man, those are must-see. If you're a fan, you got to be there, right? Even if they're going to lose, you got to be there. Texas doesn't have very good home games. The best team they play every single year, or the one the fans want to see, it happens in Dallas. Right? So there's not a lot of rivalry games in Austin. I think moving to the SEC helps that, and in theory, that'll help recruiting as well.